let's dive into the main content of today, which, as I said, is, we'll be talking about how confidently talk to your clients about ways that you can impact their business. So the reason that we picked this topic for today is because we found during our cash flow advisory accelerator programs, we've got an active coached one as well as a do-it-yourself one. We often found that a lot of professionals that had technical and great interpersonal skills still had a lot of questions around what's next when it comes to advisory discussions, like how can they impact their clients? How do you even talk to them about it? And the reality is that no one actually knows what will happen next when it comes to these kind of discussions or how the client's going to react. There's simply too many variables for anyone to actually know that. Personality of the client is a really big variable there. The financial situation that they're in, how you even want to talk to them is a variable. And all of these can be thought through in advance. But if your client woke up on the wrong side of the bed, as an example, your conversation is going to go in a much different way that you expect. So there's just simply a lot of things that you can't control. And so the reality is you want to be confident in talking to your clients about ways that you can impact them. You just need to know your purpose, prepare properly, and really be sure that the discussions that you have with your client will be valuable. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the crux of the situation, is that we're really talking about confidence here. And so when people are saying, what's next? How do I talk to my client? Really, they're asking questions around what are our abilities and what do our clients think of those abilities? So will the client find what I'm talking about useful, or will they think it's a terrible idea? And ultimately speaking, will they actually pay for that idea? There's a lot of internalizations and emotional charging that we tend to do as professionals, and probably way too much so. I think generally speaking, we as professionals, bookkeepers, accountants, consultants, we worry far too much about what the client thinks without actually asking them. We're biasing their thoughts with what we actually think. So that's really what we want to talk about today. The reality is the client has a much different viewpoint than we do, and we really need to be cognizant of that. If we want to make an impact on their business, we need to eliminate that bias so that we can really progress the value of the relationship and everything that comes along with that. So it's maybe a little bit fluffy, but that is what we are going to be talking about today. Essentially a quasi-framework that you can use to build up your confidence if you're feeling a little bit apprehensive, and start having more impactful conversations with your clients. So what would that framework be? We kind of touched on it a little bit loosely already, but we think there's 5 core things that you should really think about if you're feeling unsettled or insecure about approaching your clients with different ideas. We believe that you need to firstly remember that you're qualified, and then you need to actually remember that you know your client inside and out. And then the third thing would be you need to pick your idea, think it through. Fourth would be you actually need to stop listening to yourself, and then you can actually go forward and present it. And so within each of those 5 kind of topics, we'll be unpacking that a little bit and talking about what each of those means in a little more depth. So when I say remember that you're qualified, it probably sounds a little bit funny and might seem a little bit overly simplistic, but it's always good to remember that regardless of your experience, your education, or your skill sets, that you are qualified. So perhaps you have a designation like a CPA, or there's bookkeeping designations like CPBs, CDBs in the US for digital bookkeepers, or there's countless other ones, especially because we're talking about the global community here. Perhaps you have none of that, but you have training of some sort, whether it's a university degree, a college certificate, technical certificate, or even apprenticeship. And all of this is great, but I think we as professionals really need to remind ourselves that what really matters is that your client hired you for a reason. And that reason was to provide a high quality service. You didn't go into business to provide an average or below average service, and your client certainly didn't hire you to provide an average or below average service. So what that means is that your client has actually qualified you to talk to them. So they've really already given you that permission. They're open to any new ideas, knowledge, or information that you can provide that will better them in any way, shape, or form. That's quite literally why they hired you. So in fact, just by bringing something to the table, a new idea or a new concept, you'll probably be doing something that a lot of other professionals haven't done for your clients in the past. because they were either too scared or they were too busy. I know from my personal experience in our firm that a lot of people think that they get just the bare minimum. So that's quite literally what we're talking about here, is that some people are apprehensive in talking to their clients about change and different concepts that might better their client. The reality is that the client is super open to it and they actually want it, because 9 times out of 10, that's not actually what they've experienced in the past. They've experienced just the bare minimum. And I'm sure you've probably heard that from your clients in the past too. They've received just the bare minimum. That's why they came to you. And so you really need to be cognizant of that. The point here is that we often see people asking the questions, how do I talk to my client about X? And what they're really asking is, should I be doing this? And it's often because they think they're lacking experience or a title or a certification. Not to dig into it too much, but you can see that a lot between accountants and bookkeepers, where a bookkeeper maybe thinks they shouldn't be doing it because that's an accounting job. But the reality is that qualifications and titles don't matter. And don't get me wrong on that, they do. I can't do an audit or review because I'm legally not qualified. So please keep that comment in context. But your ideas and your advice come from your experience, your skills, and your expertise, as well as your beliefs. And so when you're talking about presenting these to your client, really the only thing that's really holding you back is probably your own apprehension. So remember, the client is looking for it. They really want it. So that apprehension is really unwarranted. So the second piece out of this framework that we're talking about is remembering that you know your client inside and out. So unless you have a brand new client, you basically know their financial picture in completion. If you do their bookkeeping, you know all of their processes, you know how they handle them, you know how well they record their data, and you know exactly where they're spending their money, when and how. And if you do their accounting or taxes, you know their current financial situation, you know their past performance, you know which areas of their business are doing better than others. And in either case, you also have a good idea of how emotionally tied they are to their finances. You probably heard them talk about the stresses that keep them up at night, their pain points, things they'd like to hear solved. So regardless of that first point that we talked about, the being qualified piece, regardless of your certifications or your education, you already have a lot of information about your client already. And you probably already have a whole host of different ideas about how they can improve their business. And so when we work with people in the past through our education programs, we really love to challenge them to list 5 things they can improve for their clients right away. And this kind of validates what I was just talking about, because we often find that most of these professionals can list off 5 things almost off the top of their head. It's pretty quick. They can get there in 5 to 10 minutes. Could be process things like invoicing quicker, improving collection terms, data collection processes, so on. Or it could be a little more ubiquitous, business-wise, where there's cost cuttings that could be done. They could be implementing budgets or strategic plans, or just something as simple as saving a portion of money every month for taxes. But the point is that you likely already have a number of really valuable insights for your client just waiting for you to talk to them about. And so again, tying that back to the first point, the only thing holding us back is your own apprehension. Your client wants it. You've already got a ton of different ideas, likely. And so the only thing holding us back is ourselves. So if you keep that in mind, you've got multiple different ways about things that you could do to improve your client. You've reminded yourself that you've been hired for your expertise. They've hired you for your expertise. And this is where you just simply have to pick an idea. And so that's the third piece of the framework. At some point, you just have to commit and decide, yes, this is the topic I'm going to talk to them about. This is what I think will drive the most impact for them, and I want to run with it. And that's a pretty big important step, is just taking that commitment. But once you do, it's a really good practice to probably take some time and actually think about it. And again, this might seem a little overly simplistic, but it's pretty easy to think of an idea, run with it, and talk to the client about it maybe a little bit prematurely. So depending on your idea, take some time to think about it. That might mean whiteboarding a flow chart, or perhaps writing out a memo that really explains your thoughts in detail. And again, this is for you, not necessarily your client. It's just to formulate that concept and really make it concrete. And while you're doing that, you should really consider exactly what it's going to take to implement exactly what it's going to cost your client, if anything, and sometimes it will, whether it's software or people resources or whatever that might be. And it's really important to talk about or think about the expected results and really make that concrete, because we'll talk about it a little bit later. That really helps frame up the value proposition for the client. And that's really what is going to get them engaged with your idea. And if you can really nail that, I think you can be 100% confident in talking about anything with your client, because you know exactly what you can do for your client, and that value prop will really drive it home. And so essentially, when you're thinking about your concept, you want to end up in the spot where you have a very clear idea of how things will be carried out from start to finish, and exactly what your client will get out of it. And again, that gives you the value proposition and an implementation plan, just even at a very high level that you can present to your client. And so, of course, now you've got it to a point where you've got it conceptualized in steps and an implementation plan. Now you should really take some time to think about how you're going to present the idea to your client. And here it's good to think about their style and their personality. You know, do they like small talk, or do they prefer to cut straight to the chase? Do they like open dialogue, or are they a little more formal in terms of how they like to see things approached? Are they visual? You know, that's something that we talk a lot about in the cash flow space, where a lot of the people that we speak to are more visual than table-based learners. So you really need to make sure that you think about how you're delivering your message so that you can deliver that value proposition really quickly. You know, example is, if your client is enamored by numbers, really hammering home and focusing on the ROI, the return on this change, is really key. If they're maybe a little more concerned with time and their lack of time, you know, you could highlight how your process will save them time and effort, and that really hammers them, really hammers home that value proposition. So putting some time and thought into how you present your idea and what is important to your client in terms of the results will really help solidify what the actual conversation will look like, even if it's just at a very conceptual level. And that can help too in terms of providing confidence, because it will give you a little more concept and idea around how that will look, how it's going to be structured, and how it should flow, which typically the more you know, the less stress you have around it, which means probably the more confidence you have. So that would be the third point, is just pick an idea, go with it, commit. You know, that's pretty important. And so once you've picked that idea, thought through with it, the fourth point that we think in terms of this framework that we kind of loosely developed is stop listening to yourself. You know, it's a really good idea to do that. You've got a very solid idea of your path, and now you're going to be presenting it. And you really need to remember that your clients are itching for your advice. Again, you're qualified. They've come to you for your ideas and how you can improve your business. And so what we want to do here is really dispel any remaining doubts that you might have as a professional in terms of talking to your clients. You want to get rid of those little voices in your head that are asking really silly questions about whether your client will like the idea or not. You know, again, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to helping our clients. The truth is that your idea is valuable in some form, and the client will benefit from it to some degree. It's literally just a question of how much they will benefit from it, and what is it going to look like to make that change. And again, this ties back to what we're talking about when you really need to think about how you're presenting it and the value proposition that's will result from it. Because if you can really drive that home and make a really strong case in terms of the value proposition, then your client will agree with it. There's no real reason for them not to. And so once you've thought that through, you picked it, and you run with it, now you actually need to present it. And you're pretty well prepared at this point, so it should be pretty easy to be confident. I do say that a little bit loosely because obviously there's an emotion here, but if you're following all these steps, you put a lot of time and effort into thinking about how you're going to approach things, and your chances of success are quite high because you put that time and effort into it. And so it's really good to remember that as you're having these conversations, that you don't need, there's going to be questions, and you don't need answers to all of these questions ahead of time. You know, maybe it's good to have some concept around what the questions might be, but again, you don't know what the client's going to ask. You don't know exactly how they're thinking depending on the day. And so trying to answer all of the questions before you know what they are is kind of like, so the whole concept here is that the client really wants wants to work with you to improve their business in a collaborative process. It's extremely important to them. And so it is completely okay to not know the answers to any questions right there. Take those back, research them, think of different approaches, other ways to consider and change those concepts, and then take it back to the table and talk to the client again and iterate that process. That really is what the clients are looking for. They're looking for a business partnership. And usually, in talking business dialogue, that's exactly what it looks like. Is plans presented, conversation occurs, people think of different things, plan changes, iterate. There. That's quite literally what we're looking for. So, what the client is looking for. So again, it's really okay that you don't know all the answers to all of the questions leading into a conversation. And it's important to note because we do find a lot of practitioners get really hesitant about talking about advisory and business consulting because they might not have all the answers. And the reality is it's the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day. That's exactly what applies here. You're trying to help them progress, and progression doesn't happen instantaneously. And now, in saying that, when you're having these conversations with your client, it's also really good to remember and good to know that you should be asking your client questions. If they aren't necessarily sold on your idea, that's okay, but you really need to make sure you dig into why. This gives you a lot of information about how they're thinking and what you might need to overcome that thinking. So as an example, was the idea too big of a change and it's scary? If so, then you can take that concept and build it out into smaller projects and maybe that solves it. Maybe they're just simply unsure of the end value of the project. And so are there ways that you can think about different ways of presenting it? So maybe that gets over the objections. So hearing no isn't a bad thing. It just maybe means that the idea and the concept wasn't properly explained and the perceived value is a little bit low. And so asking questions to a client, how they feel, what their pain points are, and really digging into how you might be able to explain it in the future better will raise the perceived value of your concept, which is an important part of the process. And it's interesting because this is probably something that isn't talked about a lot in accounting, but once you start getting into things like fintech and selling period, in sales process, this is what they call objection handling. So someone said no, it actually doesn't really mean no all the time. It just means that there's something that they don't understand. And so that's an objection. And so digging into what those objections are by asking further questions is really important. And we find it quite a bit where, and I'm even guilty of it too, where sometimes you hear no, and that's kind of where the conversation stops. You don't want to put any more effort into it because you're concerned about looking stupid or the value isn't there, whatever that might be. And it's really good to note that because if you can get over that feeling and ask more questions about why this objection is occurring, it could be that your idea is really great for them. You just need to get them a little further along how they the actual concept, and that could just be a presentation. So ask lots of questions. And the last thing that I'll kind of comment on is that during these conversations with your client, no is actually okay. And as practitioners, we work with numbers, and everything we do has a large degree of certainty to it. And we can sometimes get really caught up about being right all the time. And because of that, we get really hung up and hear the answer no. And so that is also important to note, because no doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that you're maybe not, that idea isn't maybe the right fit for that right point in time, or maybe the client just isn't ready for it yet. There's just something holding you back. So the point here is that you shouldn't get discouraged by hearing no. Again, your client has hired you for a reason. They value what you do. They value you as a human, and they value any of the ideas and concepts that you're bringing forth. That's what would happen in a business if you had an employee. That would be the expectation. And so the main point here is don't let it get you down. Keep the ideas flowing. Keep the conversations flowing. And at some point in time, you'll start bringing your clients much more than not, and that will start driving a lot. And so, like I said, this session was pretty quick. That was around 15 minutes, give or take. And so that is our framework. Leave it at that. So if there's any questions, I'd love Does anybody have any questions around talking to the clients, being confident about coach, planning,
Actually, I've got one. So I don't know kind of what everyone does on this call, but if someone's primary role with the company is bookkeeping and maybe producing, month-end financials, how do you go about kind of pitching business advisory services that are supposed to be more of a higher end service, and probably you want to get more money than you could out of bookkeeping? So do you have any kind of tips and tricks to convince a client that's used to paying you X that you kind of want X plus 10, for the advisory?
Yeah, Peter, I think that's a really great question. Like in terms of what can a bookkeeper do to move from that bookkeeping space and try to get more into advisory, and how do they pitch that to their clients? I think it's exactly how I described. Usually when you're working with a client as a bookkeeper, you've got a really good idea of, probably more so than you want to. I find on the bookkeeping side, because that is a component of our business line, you're almost a psychiatrist of sorts, not just a financial person. You start really getting into the meat of how that person operates, because you have a really good idea of the transactional flow of how things are actually moving through their business, like the actual data as well as the money. And so it really lends quite well into, and this isn't a sales pitch, but like the budgeting, the forecasting, and the cash flow forecasting. That's a really easy move, and I don't want to make it seem like it's click of a button easy, but it's a natural progression is maybe the best way to frame that, in terms of taking a bookkeeper level service offering and adding in budgeting, forecasting, variance analysis, that kind of stuff on top of it. Because the skill set to do that is not, you don't need a rocket science degree to do that. You already have the skill set as a bookkeeper or an accountant to do that. It's just a question of carrying it out and providing the value proposition to the client. So I think it's more a case of, A, do you want to do it? Because if you don't even bother. B, assuming that you do want to do it, then it's kind of using this framework where, okay, I've got this concept around what I want to do. So let's pick budgeting. I really think that budgeting could benefit this client quite well, because they are overspending on their advertising or their meals and entertainment. And based off what I know from them relative to other businesses I serve, it's completely off the charts. And I know that because it's off the charts, I can save them $200 a month, whatever that number might be. Right there, that's what I'm saying. When you know your client, you already are armed with a boatload of information that you can use, not against your client, but for the benefit of your client. Because what I'm saying here is, we've got a situation where you've got a solution, what it can do. So you've got the value proposition, and the economic benefit of that actual value proposition. So you can carry out budgeting, you can save them $200 a month. And by saving them $200 a month, they'll be much better off over time. And likely, you'll be able to save them more money through the budgeting process, as long as they're
them 150.
Sorry, what's that?
I said, then you'll charge them 150.
Well, no, but the point there would be like, yeah, it's a question then of pricing and what you charge for it. And so, keeping that $200 in context, like that's probably one area. As we know from most of our clients, that if you're overspending in one, you're probably overspending in multiple. And so that 200, once you start looking through the chart of accounts, is probably more like 2,000. And running that budget is a very simple process. You simply take what they were doing in the last 12 months, you create the budget for your expectations for the next 12, you talk with them about it. It's front end heavy, so you spend lots of time up front building it, collaborating, dialoguing with them, and setting it up. But then it's a maintenance phase where now you're just checking the budget to actual, and did they actually hit their targets, and trying to keep them accountable. And so that's pretty low lift relative to the budgeting piece. But the value equation there for the business owner is quite high, because what you're saying is, well, maybe for $200 a month, that's a good trade-off. If I can save you $2,000 a month, it is easily worth $200 a month because you can 10x their money back. And my guess would be is if that's actually what you believe you can save them, is you should probably be trying for more money than that. And it's not to gouge them, it's because you're providing them a huge value in terms of, you know, what are the lifetime savings of that $2,000? Because not only are you saving them $2,000 this year, you're actually saving them $2,000 next, plus inflation. And you're probably keeping them under control so that they are not overspending as they progress. So, you know, maybe this year they overspend 2, and next year they overspend 3, and the year after they overspend 4. You're literally helping them contain that. And that's where I think having the information around your client is really important, and really thinking about that value proposition. Like I don't want to stress it too much because it's not the be all end all, but it is extremely important in the process, is thinking about your client and the end benefit they get, because regardless of how you pitch it, that's going to be what's important to them, because that's what impacts them. That's what they see. That's what they feel. So I think in terms of how you pitch it, it could literally be an email. Like I've got lots of clients where I will pitch concepts to them in a 2-paragraph email. I've got other clients where I actually want to sit down with them and talk to them through it. And again, that's just knowing who your client is, what resonates with them, almost the leeway that you have with it and their style, and just really thinking about them as a person and what makes the most sense for their situation. And so once you've got that, that's kind of how I built that framework out, is, you know, think it through. You've got the idea, you've got the value proposition. How are you going to talk to them? And it's just a simple question of, do they say yes or no? And be okay with no, because, you know, I do find even when we talk about pricing, we always talk about that quite a bit, pricing, proposals, this, that, the other. No is an okay answer, because if they're saying no, like a hard no, it means that they're not valuing what you're providing. And there's probably somebody else out there that will. And so if you try to cater to the person that doesn't value you, you might be giving up your capacity and your ability to work for somebody that does. And that really can't be discounted, because that is why we all feel like we're working too much, because we continually say yes and adjust to people that maybe don't value us as much as other people might. So, you know, letting people go. I don't mean, you know, go cut your clients, all half of them right now. But over time, the more people that you can get that value you truly, the better off you will be. And that totally went on a tangent, so I apologize.
Now that you know your microphone's working, you're like, oh, I'll just keep talking.
I got my platform. Now I will speak from the mountaintop. Sorry
It
about
was all
that.
good. It was all good and it was all true.
Yeah, I think that was interesting, because you seem to be kind of introducing the concept of value-based pricing as opposed to hourly pricing, right?
Well, and honestly, it even doesn't go to value-based pricing. If you want to price hourly, value-based pricing, I'll get lynched for this as soon as it goes up on the internet. But you can value price hourly, in my belief. You know, when we think about our method of value pricing is fixed monthly fee, and we make sure that what we are providing for the client is properly valued based off the effort that we're doing and the return that they're getting. So we do spend some time on it, but we fix that monthly. But there's nothing saying that you couldn't do that on an hourly basis. It wrecks the construct a little bit, because the true value pricing people out there would say, well, if you work less, you should earn more. And that's 100% true. But, you know, if I'm doing work that other people can do for $200 and I'm able to charge $2,000 because my perceived value is that much higher, that is a form of value pricing. It is just slightly different. And to be clear, I am very much about fixed pricing. You know, I love monthly recurring revenue. It creates some very interesting and amazing things you can do from a practice level, because you have certainty of income, which allows you to, you know, hire properly. There's so many benefits to it. But I also know that, you know, there's a lot of lawyers out there that value price properly, and they make a lot of money too. So you can't really say that one is 10 times better than the other. I think it really does. It depends on your approach, depends on your style, and it depends what you're comfort with. As long as you are valuing your services properly, because, you know, when I talk about that lawyer charging $1,000 an hour, he or she knows exactly what they're worth. I don't often see that in the accounting space, where people are billing out at $30 an hour. You know, there is no way you should be charging out at that rate. And I use that term loosely too, because I appreciate that there are times where should be. But my point is that if you're trying to do a budget or a forecast or controllership work, you should probably be adding a 0 to that hourly rate, because it's that level of services. Like if we're saving somebody $2,000 a month, you shouldn't be charging $30 an hour for that kind of work. My humble opinion. And I'm sure I know when everybody, Trent and Jordan and everybody puts this one up on social media, I'm just going to get blasted. So let them come. Yeah, it was a good question. I think that it's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons that our team wanted to talk about this topic, because we have talked to enough professionals out there that everybody we've talked to has really good technical skills. They've got great ideas. They genuinely, truly want to help their clients. The empathy's there, the relationships are there. And the key piece that's missing for a lot of people is the confidence piece. And, that's part of what we want to do here, is just let people know, like, it's okay to not be confident. That's okay. It's okay to not know what you're doing sometimes, struggle through it a bit, and ask other people for help. Because at the end of the day, even that really confident person that's charging $1,000 an hour as a lawyer, they have to start somewhere too. And so getting comfortable with it and having a framework around it and really just thinking through it so that you can be more confident, we believe is a really big first step for a lot of people out there. Because it's a huge thing in the advisory space. Like advisory, that's why we said at the front, this isn't just about cash flow. It could be about anything. It could be about tax advisory. Whatever you want to help consult people to do to improve their business is advisory. And so getting really confident in terms of delivering that message is important, because if you've got a good idea, you should be sharing it. That's how we help each other. And true value is win-win. So you're helping the client and they'll pay you more money to do that. That's a win-win. This is just chock full of rants now.
They're good rants.
Highly quotable.
Yeah, right.
Kelvin said.
That's right.
Is there any other questions that people had? I think that was a really good question. So totally open mic, open forum here.
No, it was a good topic. I appreciate hearing you don't have to have all the answers right off the get-go.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, to dive, I guess, into another rant, I think that is it's a good topic to talk about, because we do find people get hung up, especially in the cash flow space, around, what happens next. And the reality is that you're not even going to have time to think about it, because say that budget example that we went over, where you're saving somebody $2,000 a month by, doing this and doing that. That's going to lead them to ask more questions, whether it's, well, have you looked at this area, or could we do improvements here? The fact that you've engaged and have been proactive will then essentially start the dialogue and almost tell your client that it's okay to provide feedback the other direction, because it is. But once you start doing that, you're going to get questions back. And, we talk about that quite a bit, where once you open the floodgates, sometimes it's a little overwhelming about what comes back. And that's why it's okay to not have all the answers, because you don't know what they'll be. And it could be that your client comes back to you with a question that you didn't even think about. And that's why it's also okay to not know the answer right away, because, as a proper professional, I don't know everything. I'm completely comfortable in saying that. But what I do know is that I'm pretty confident in my skill set and my ability to find the right answer, even if I have to reach out to somebody else. And that takes time. And so if somebody comes to me with a complex tax question, I am not qualified for that. But I'm also very confident in finding the right person who is, and helping my client connect with that person, and even being the intermediary between them. And that is a completely reasonable answer. And so I think really getting hung up on also not knowing everything, and maybe that's a 6th point that we add into our framework, but it's okay to not know everything and talk to other people about it as well.
And then I guess you have to worry about scope creep at that point.
Yeah, well, yeah. and that is a whole completely different question. But yes, 100% that would lead to scope creep, because if somebody's asked that level of a question and you're starting to bring in other people and resources, there obviously is a component of scope creep. And it's a good point to bring up, Selena, because that is the death knell of everybody in our industry, which is we are way too nice. And I don't mean this in a rude way. Again, I don't want to come across like I'm gouging our clients all the time, but we as an industry are very empathetic. We genuinely want to help everybody that we work with. And it's really easy for us to do things for free because we can. And sometimes that isn't beneficial to your client because it reduces your capacity to actually help them because you're working for free. And just trying to be cognizant of that. It's really important. It's a major challenge in the industry, I think.
But doesn't that also open the door to just having a kind of a bucket of services, like absolute advisory, like opening the door to that? You could do mandates that are open-ended, 5 hours a month, asking you whatever you want.
Yep, 100%. And I do find it interesting. I mean, if you subscribe to, say, Ron Baker, he's starting to play around with the whole concept of almost like premium subscription type value pricing, where you charge somebody a very large amount, almost like an insurance company, in advance of not knowing what questions you're going to get. But they're paying a big premium to have the flexibility to ask you whatever they want, whenever they want. And it's a very interesting concept, because if you look at a lot of the products and services and everything that we're buying as a society, there is most certainly a premium market out there where people want that. They will pay you whatever for the simple capability of having access to your time at any time. Within reason, obviously. You don't want people calling you at 2 a.m., but if they can ask you anything at any time during normal business hours, that can be very valuable to them, because it gives them the comfort knowing that they have access. And I do know from my experience that is a massive pain point for a lot of people in the industry, is, again, going back to people being overworked, taking on too many clients, they can't properly deliver. It really means that the majority of clients out there are being grossly underserved. And so one of their key pain points for finding other practitioners and professionals is having access, having somebody that will just simply talk to them. And it sounds so simple, but it is the truth, where I can't count how many times I've heard it through prospective clients, whether we've gotten them as clients or not. But one of their key pain points is it's hard to get a hold of my existing practitioner, period. And that speaks to exactly what you said, premium subscription-based modeling, where you provide that access. So it's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, I think that anybody can do it, whether you're operating but as their bookkeeper, or as their advisor, or as their accountant. Right. If someone could phone up their bookkeeper with just a random question, something that happens during the workday, and they need some advice, yep. Right? You just call them up. I mean, that would be so cool, right? If you build that into your pricing scheme, yep. Of X amount for traditional services, even if it's an hour a month, right? It's like found revenue. Especially when you think about it,
I appreciate your comment about, not trying to demean the bookkeeping industry, because, everybody provides value in different ways. If you look at what really drives a business, it is bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. So it is a completely valuable service and a high value service. And so my head immediately goes to around those comments to, payroll. If you're handling payroll for somebody, and next thing you know, they've got an employee in a very weird situation, what you're talking about is exactly what they need. They need to be able mm-hmm. to call their practitioner and say, hey, we've got this really funky situation. What are your thoughts? What do you think about it? Could you spend some time researching, this odd regulation, so that I don't have to go call, expert XYZ or lawyer or whatever. And maybe they end up there, but at the very least, they have the capability to call you and lean on you. And there is massive value in that, because, you're taking not all of their stress, but a very significant proportion of their stress away, which is extremely valuable. Most people that have listened to me enough to know that I do believe in value pricing, and really making sure you get proper value for what you provide. And a large piece of that is really keeping in context the emotions of your client and focusing on their pains. It's one thing to say, I can provide HR payroll services, but it's another thing to frame it as, I will alleviate all of your stress related to employee and HR. Like that is I said the same thing, but in two different ways, and I know which one's more valuable as opposed to the other. And so we really need to talk about, when I talk emotions and value pricing, I really mean marketing yourself properly. So really speaking to the end benefit to the client. And that doesn't mean the technical benefit. It means their end benefit, which is typically an emotional response. And that's what gets me all jacked up.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
that
definitely not a pricing expert. Trust me. Trust me.
Sounds like you're doing well with it. I do stuff like that. Not every project, but where it's possible, is you're pitching a bank of hours for fixed services, but you always build in kind of and whatever comes up, type of thing, right? So it opens the door to what you were talking about of that premium service, right? If they know that there's some nebulous time in there to say, I can just call this guy and ask him anything.
Yep.
Right. So it allows you, I think anyways, to kind of to up the value of your monthly package or your quarterly package that you're selling, right? Because you're building in the whatever.
100%. And I think it's also good to note, not even from a premium packaging standpoint, but also from, now we're getting into a pricing topic, which tends to happen. But I think it's also good to keep in mind from just an overall fundamental pricing perspective, because I know from our internal process that it's very easy to price on perfection. And I always like to tell our team here internally, we can't be pricing to perfection because it doesn't exist. And so even going back to that question around the HR, like, if you're doing payroll, you're going to run into the odd time where somebody worked overtime and it's never happened. And now you need to watch out for this. And there's always these superfluous things that happen that we never thought about when we were actually quoting the job out in the first place. And so I think it's always really good to make sure that you're not pricing on perfection, because that also compounds the problem of scope creep, value pricing, making sure you're pricing properly, even before you get to the value pricing and the premium that you're talking about, which is even a step beyond that, saying, not only have I thought about perfect and I've wrapped around imperfect around that, but we're even taking it a step further and saying, now you've got an unallocated bucket of something that you can access for whatever you want. And to do that, we'll charge, premium price Y, which I think is really interesting.
So they maybe like for people that do payroll, are you kind of suggesting that they're pricing out the payroll service and then build a buffer around it?
Not knowing how other people do it to the nth degree, I would suggest that people have the propensity to price perfectly. And that propensity usually comes from, I don't want to charge my client too much because they might say no. Whereas you need to really come from the perspective of, you need to expect bad word S stuff to happen because it will. And, just make sure you're accounting for that. So yes, it would be good to use a buffer of hours to make sure that you're not just pricing perfectly in your, proposals and your quotes and engagements. Because, I've been around long enough to know that we've never had a perfect job. And, I think we do a really good job with a lot of our clients, but not a single one of them is perfect. The ones that are perfect are, 98% of the way there. There's always something else that you could do, which again, I almost think speaks to the topic that we're talking about, which, if you're sitting here thinking about how can I talk to people about impacting their business, there's always something that you can do. Even if it is perfect this month, maybe there's a new technology that comes out next month that would be a game changer for them. And those kind of things should be considered in terms of improving their business. So there's just a component of knowing your client and knowing what's going on in the industry so you can help them properly as well. A little bit of a tangent on that one, sorry. Yeah. These are all These are all great questions. I love them.
Yeah, we're running out of time though.
We are. Yep. I should probably cut it, or else we will go over. So
Yeah.
I do thank you for that interaction at the end there. That was good. And I do believe that's why I'm saying that the more people you can share this with, the better, because I think the more that we can have open dialogue like that, there is a huge benefit to learning from the community, and really kind of sourcing that knowledge base essentially.